One of the great things about living in Europe is all the days we have off thanks to people from the past. Saints, kings, national heroes, we honor them with statues, street names, and holidays. But if we're really honest, we don't actually know who they truly were. Between the history books and long weekends, their real stories, their humanity, their choices, their struggles, often gets lost. The truth is that behind every legend is a real flesh and blood, flawed human, just like us. But the challenge is to see past the myths, to get closer to the real people, because their lives still have something to teach us. Here in Ireland, we hold on to one of those people pretty tightly, a man named Patrick. But for all the parades, paintings, and green-coloured celebrations, the real Patrick often gets drowned out by the noise. So who was he? And how did someone who wasn't even Irish become the ultimate symbol of Irishness? He was born into a family of faith somewhere on the west coast of Britain, in a time when many families like his depended on Roman protection. But when the Roman Empire withdrew its troops from Britain, these communities were suddenly exposed, especially to Irish raiders. These raiders launched brutal hit-and-run attacks, stealing whatever they could carry, including people. Patrick, just 16, was torn from his home, his family, and everything he knew. He was trafficked across the sea and forced to herd sheep in the cold, mountainous wilderness of the Irish West. It's hard to imagine how that would have felt, to be kidnapped, to be treated like property, to be surrounded by strangers in a land that you didn't recognize, in a language you couldn't understand, with no way home and no hope of escape. Patrick would have been heartbroken. He would have been hopeless. I think he would have been angry at his captors, angry at the life he lost, probably angry at God. And yet in this place of pain and isolation, this is where his faith deepened. A faith that would have been maybe a family thing had now become personal. By his own words, in his confession, he wrote, "After I had come to Ireland, they made me shepherd the flocks day after day. And as I did so, I would pray all the time, right throughout the day. More and more, the love of God and fear of Him grew strong within me. I realize now it was the Spirit burning in me at that time." It's a hard truth, but a real one. Sometimes suffering is the place where faith becomes real. Sometimes pain opens up a space in us that comfort never could. And this is a pattern that we see throughout the scriptures. Stories of people crying out in despair, only to be met by a God who hears them. Take Joseph, for example, sold into slavery by his brothers, finding himself in an Egyptian prison. Or Daniel, kidnapped and raised in a foreign court, betrayed for holding on to his faith. And Esther, chosen against her will and living in an egotistical king's harem, risking it all to intercede for the survival of her people. God was there, and God was with them. Even Jesus himself, abandoned and bleeding on a cross, crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" God was still there. This is the God that Patrick met, not distant, not detached, but present in suffering. And then one night, 6 years after being taken captive, in a dream he heard a voice say, "Soon you will return to your own country. Come and see, your ship is waiting." Risking everything, Patrick ran. And after crossing 200 dangerous miles of unfamiliar terrain, he arrived at a port he had never seen before. And just like the dream had promised, a ship was waiting. This is more than a story of survival. It's a story of spiritual awakening. A reminder that God is not just there in comfort, He is there in captivity. He is there in our suffering. He is the God who hears us when we cry and who draws near when we feel forgotten. As the ancient song puts it, if your heart is broken, you will find God right there. If you've been kicked in the gut, He will help you catch your breath. He escaped Ireland a completely different person, a free man embarking on a whole new journey. Patrick didn't choose his suffering, but in the middle of it, he reached out to the God who suffers with us and found Him. After years of slavery and far from his home and his family, we can imagine Patrick standing on the bow of the ship, weeping with relief. Behind him is the land of his bondage. In front of him is the open sea, and a sense of freedom that he never thought he would experience again. But it wasn't taking him back to the life he once led. This ship didn't take him home. It brought him into the unknown. Most scholars believe that the ship took him to what we now know as France, where he would have studied scripture and joined a Christian community. He could have gone on to do many other things, but something inside him had changed. His faith, born in suffering, was beginning to take root. In his new community, he learned what it was like to truly follow Jesus, and not just in belief, but in practice. He saw what it was like to live a life of prayer, service, and love. Faith is like a flame. It needs tending. It needs shelter, a community to protect it. And it needs fuel, like scripture, wisdom, and experience. And it needs air, space to ask, to doubt, and to grow. All of this fanned Patrick's faith into a fire that consumed his life. And in the process, he found a deeper calling. After what I'm sure felt like multiple lifetimes for his parents, Patrick chose to voyage back to the family home. What a relief this must have been. But I wonder, did they recognize him? Taken mercilessly as a boy, he now returned as a man on a mission, a man determined to serve God and follow His lead. Desperate to keep what was once lost, Patrick recounts that back at home, his parents begged me to give them my word, that after suffering so great an ordeal, I should never leave them again. But Patrick couldn't make that promise, because God was calling him back. We all know what it's like to feel the pull of other people's plans. Parents, teachers, leaders, everybody has an idea of what we should do. Patrick's leaders would have hoped that he had remained in France, maybe rise in church leadership. A safe and sensible plan for Patrick would have been to head east. Journeying towards Rome would have meant a return to the protection of the Roman Empire, the privilege of the church, and a path upwards into religious hierarchy. But Patrick had this dream, and in it he heard something that he just couldn't shake. He said it was the voice of the Irish, those who had enslaved him, and they were crying out. And they said, "We beg you, come once again and walk among us." Patrick said that this pierced him to his heart, but he didn't make a quick decision. He really wrestled with it. Like, could he really do this to his parents again? The hurt that they'd been through? Or could he return to the Irish people who had robbed everything from him? So he prayed and he prayed, and one night he heard the voice again. And it said this: "Jesus, who gave up his very soul for you, he it is who is speaking within your soul." And so for Patrick, this was no longer about safety. It was about obedience. It was no longer about comfort. It was about courage. Throughout Scripture, we see men and women stepping into hard places, not because it was easy, but because God called them. And by doing so, their courage and faith changed the world. Abraham left everything he knew to follow God into the unknown. Mary Magdalene became the first witness to the resurrection in a world where a woman's testimony wasn't even considered valid. Paul traveled dangerous roads and faced hostile crowds to share the message of Jesus. God's call often leads us into hard places, but that's where his story unfolds. Even Jesus was called to lay his life down so that others might live. And for Patrick, he was called to return to the place of his trauma. Calling never comes with clarity at first. It starts with a whisper, a burden, a tug of the soul. But the invitation is always the same. Trust me. To find our purpose in this world, we're invited to listen to the heart of God, who from the very beginning of time has always been reaching out to heal what is hurting, to restore what is broken, and to find what is lost. At 40, Patrick returned to Ireland, not as a captive, but by choice, on a mission to ignite the flame of faith that would light a nation. If you were willing, where could God lead you? If you could go back in time and pull Patrick into our world, I think he'd be shocked. And I think the thing that would shock him the most, it wouldn't be the fact that water's coming out of the tap or there's books in the library. It would be that the most iconic buildings in the world turn green in his honor. He never would have foresaw that. He saw himself more as a simple servant, as someone who was doing his best, responding to the grace that God had given to him. I was like some great stone, lying deep in mud, until he who is power came and in his mercy lifted me up. Patrick's life was shaped by suffering, but it was reshaped by the love of God, a love that met him at his lowest and led him toward healing, purpose, and courage. That's why Patrick calls God He who is power, because in the place of powerlessness, Patrick discovered grace. And his story mirrors others who are found in Scripture, some who are as equally unlikely. Moses, a murderer who led his people out of slavery in Egypt. David, a boy who defeated a giant with only a stone of faith. Mary, a teenage girl who said yes to bearing and raising Jesus. Their stories remind us that God doesn't wait for perfection. He invites those who are willing, just as Patrick was. It was love that led Patrick back to Ireland, to the place that had once enslaved him. Most would have avoided it forever. Patrick returned to bless it. During a pagan festival, only the High King of Ireland was permitted to light a fire, and only on the hill of Tara, a symbol of divine and royal power. Patrick defied the rule. He climbed the nearby hill of Slane and lit a fire of his own, one that could be seen across the valley. It was a declaration. A new kind of king had come. That fire caught the attention of the powerful. Kings, druids, priests. Patrick didn't cower. He preached Christ with clarity and conviction. People listened. Many believed. And from that spark, something new ignited. Patrick didn't just bring Christianity to Ireland. He brought a way of life that transformed it. As one modern reflection puts it, Patrick preached a way of life that reordered social boundaries, particularly regarding women and those on the lower end of the social order. His message elevated the dignity of the overlooked. It challenged existing power structures and inspired a movement rooted in compassion and courage. From Patrick's mission emerged a movement unlike any the world had seen before, one steeped in prayer, learning, and service. The monasteries that he inspired became sanctuaries of both faith and knowledge. The Irish monks not only preserved scripture, but they safeguarded the philosophical and theological works of ancient Greece, Rome, and early Christianity. At a time when Europe's cultural memory was fading, these communities kept the flame alive. Patrick helped ignite a movement that shaped the soul of Western civilization. And it all started with one decision: his yes. A yes to let God heal his wounds. A yes that changed an enslaved boy into a leader. A light in dark places. A witness to God's grace. Where would Ireland be without Patrick? I guess God only knows. But the same God who called him calls us, inviting us past our wounds into wholeness and onward into a world in need of God's love. You don't have to be perfect. Patrick wasn't. You don't need to have it all together. He didn't. Patrick didn't wait to be made whole in order to give his yes. Patrick said yes, and that's what made him whole. You don't have to have all the answers in order to leave a legacy. There's only one thing that matters. Will you give your yes to God? I pray that anyone who believes in God and who chooses to read these words that I, Patrick, a sinner with little learning, have written here in Ireland will understand this. Nothing I have done and nothing I have shared, even the smallest thing, comes from my own ability or wisdom. Instead, I hope you will see and believe the truth that all of this is a gift from God, given by His grace and for His purposes. These words are my confession, offered before I die.